Good morning. Bom dia a todos.
Good morning to all. It is an honor to be here once more live in this space of the Wilson Center after such a long time of pandemic, of working from home. It is a joy to be here with all of you. I'm risking my Portuguese here because I didn't have much time to practice during the pandemic, but if somebody doesn't understand something, raise your hand. I'm a little bit rusty. It is a pleasure to be here, and we are honored to have with us the president of the Superior Electoral Court, which is not the Supreme Court, but Justice Fachin is also a justice of the Brazilian Supreme Court. He has been at that function since 2015. He has a PhD in law from the Catholic University of São Paulo. He did postdoc studies at the International Council of Canadian Studies. He has also worked as a full professor at the Federal University of the State of Paraná, as a visiting lecturer at King's College, and as a visitor researcher at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. He is a member of the editorial board of several periodicals, and he was also an attorney for the state of Paraná. It is an honor and a privilege to have him among us to talk about the preparations for the Brazilian elections, presidential elections, which I think will be the most important elections that we still have this year all over the world. On behalf of the Wilson Center, of the Brazil Institute, and of the Latin American Studies, welcome. Thank you very much, Nick, Director of the Brazil Institute. We are here at the Brazil Institute, so I'm going to speak in Portuguese, just to be on the original track. I greet all here in person and all who are with us through the internet. I thank the opportunity of being here. I thank you for the invitation, and I'm at your disposal to exchange ideas and perceptions about relevant data and facts surrounding the Brazilian elections of this year, observing the inputs and outputs of the Brazilian topics and other countries. And all of this has to do not only with Brazil and the Americas, but with continental Europe as well. It is an honor and a joy to be here, since Justice Luiz Alberto Barroso, who was my predecessor, and it will always be the case with Justice Alexandre Moraes, who will take office on the 16th of August. We've been working at 6 hands on behalf of the elections, which means that we've been at it for quite a while. And it's important to say that the attention that we're trying to attract from the international community, and the attention that we are getting from this community, is very important for this exchange of ideas. We're trying to make these relationships strong and deep, because elections in Brazil don't just apply to Brazil, because they are the possibility for the existence of a plural and fair society. We participated this year already in 13 elections in the West. Costa Rica, Colombia, France, among others. There was always a mission headed by a justice of the Superior Electoral Court and a team, so that this become a two-way street to observe and are observed. We have to pay attention to these porous paths with the aim of defending democracy. This is the reason why we are preparing for the October 2nd elections. It'll be our first round. As you know, the elections in Brazil, they have two rounds in Brazil, depending on the results of the candidates. The first round is October 2nd, the second round on the 30th of October. This year we'll be electing the president and vice president, 1/3 of the Senate. In the Senate, we have 81 senators. We have 27 states, so 1/3 will be renewed this year. The House of Representatives, with 513 representatives, will be all changed, and the governors, 27 of 27 states, plus the federal district, and all of the state representatives will also be voted on. Therefore, the registry of candidacies has until August 15th to register candidates, and after that we will have an idea of the number of candidates. The first and second rounds are for president, vice president, and governors. In terms of senators, it's simple majority. We don't have early voting nor mail voting. Therefore, October 2nd will feel like a whole year, because it will be a very intense year. At the Electoral Court, we could divide in terms of planning. 2022 we divided it in 4 phases, from January 1st through August 15th, what we call a pre-campaign. Therefore, we have pre-candidates. We don't have political campaigns, not yet, not officially. The electoral justice has been receiving information from parties and pre-candidates and from the Ministry of Justices, accusing some pre-candidates for campaigning, and we are examining that. In August, we will have received several claims about certain pre-candidates who are moving around in motorcycles with a certain aim in mind. So the pre-campaign is very important because it corresponds to a male, for example, who is going to install some water pipes that nobody sees. So this, we are training poll workers for the election day. Therefore, we are working today looking at the future, and October 2nd, we will need 2,200,000 poll workers registered by October 2nd. We are working on it now, obviously. We have an electoral schedule with a series of phases. The registry of electors ended on May 4th. We are processing the last requests, and through the end of July, we will have a number of voters. We are calculating 152 million electors, which means that on October 2nd, this number of people between 125 and 130 million will be going to the polling stations. Based on this, we organize our work. In terms of the pre-campaign, this is a phase that reveals a beginning of a year that will have some challenges. The Constitution does not obey the calendar year. What the Congress needs to do needs to work until October 2nd, 2021. From then on, there is a legislative prohibition in terms of elections in order not to affect negatively the election. In our electoral court, we have until March 5th, according to the electoral code, to issue all the rules and regulations of the election. And this is what we did. The Congress, by October 2nd, did what it wanted or needed to do. It rejected the paper voting, and we regulated this until March 5th. From March 5th on, Brazil has an administrative, standard, and stabilized system for elections. This is very relevant because if anything comes up, and when here proposals from the political arena, so to speak, but this is political unless there is an intention to violate our institutionality. Therefore, we have inherited these circumstances. We stabilized it in March. We ended the calendar in May. On May 11th, we started our audit, and this calendar is still on through August 15th. On August 16th, we have the second phase of 2022, 45 days from August 16th to October 1st for the campaigns. All the candidates will have been defined by then. On August 16th, therefore, we will know who all the candidates are at all levels. During this period, our protocols and our activity are totally different. The third phase for us will be October. This is why I made a note calling these phases actually years, different years within 2022. October will be a very special month, and from the 2nd through the 30th, It'll be a very important period in terms of normalcy, legitimacy of the elections. Therefore, we have a totally different package of actions and protocols to be followed. Should we be thinking of the first round, the second round, or the period be the two of them? The fourth phase, or year, so to speak, is the day after the election, especially for president. And why the day after? Because the result of the election will be known the night of election day at 5 p.m. Brasilia time will be the end of the voting period. This year, upon my request, we nationalized the schedule of the election. We have different time zones. Our biggest difficulty was with the state of Acre, which is 2 hours away. So in previous elections, after 5 p.m. in Brasilia, we used to wait 2 additional hours for the election to end in the state of Acre. But this year, we have leveled it, and the elections there start at 6 a.m. through 3 p.m. Therefore, which will mean 5 p.m. in Brasilia. Therefore, from 5 o'clock on October 2nd through 10 p.m., all the results will be known. Therefore, when I mean the day after, what I mean is the night of the elections, be it the 2nd or the 30th, we will have the results. Then through 19th of December, the elected ones will take office. This is our mission, and we oversee their taking office. And this is our mission, and this is what we shall do, definitely. This is a constitutional mission, and the electoral justice will not stay away from it. So this is the general landscape. Over 150 million electors. We have over 5,500 localities. We will have more than 100,000 voting stations. Of course, we have a cybersecurity plan as well. And as you know, Brazil is a diversified country and very uneven in terms of number of ballot boxes for original peoples, villages, and groupings. We have many fewer ballot boxes than in a state such as São Paulo, for example, but it is our duty to take those ballots everywhere. We're doing it in a capillary way with the state regional tribunals, one in each state. It is a very capillary state. We are ready to do that. These state courts, if we add them up with the federal, we are 22,000 people working in preparation for the elections. We have 3,000 law specialists, judges. I'm one of them, and I'm just one of 3,000 people who are preparing the elections. We have about 3,000 prosecutors specialized in elections. So all of this is organized around electronic ballot boxes. They're all ready. They are preparing in terms of being ready for, they're being prepared rather in terms of introducing the software in them. 570,000 electronic ballot boxes, which will be there for voting on October 2nd. And this is done in a very transparent way. Having said that, we have an electoral calendar. We are on schedule. And in terms of auditing and supervising, we are up to date with our calendar in terms of inspections, and all we have are noises. Some of these noises are excessive. It's as if we were at a soccer team in a competition where the players discuss who the referee will be. We only react when false information about the electoral justice is disseminated. A few days ago, there was this fake news about canceling the voting documents of people older than 75, and this is not true. So we fight against this kind of information and inauthentic information, because this is disseminated a phony way using robots and everything else they can. So this is what I call political noise, but this is part of this period. The purpose is to go after the referees. We are not cheering for any particular team. We are not talking about the reserve players. We did not prepare any team. All we do is make sure the regulations are being solved. When a soccer player says there have been a fault or injustice, our first reaction is to inform. If the information is bad, with expressive partnerships, we have over 150 partnerships to fight disinformation. All the 21 political parties that are represented in the Congress, all of them without exception, were with us at the court, at the Electoral Court, and they are all committed to adopt a policy of integrity during the campaigns. All of them, without exception. We have 33 political parties. 21 are represented in the Congress, and 12 are not being represented, but through the Brazilian system, they are financed to survive and try to have popular support and become part of the Congress. Of these 12, 11 came to us, accepted our invitation, and signed a cooperation document to fight disinformation. We also did that with digital platforms, social media. The most recent one to come to us was Telegram. I spoke with the world vice president for Telegram besides Brazil, but with TikTok, with Facebook, etc., with variations, of course. This is a very expressive way of disseminating free speech and also protecting people, but such policies of integrity are there just to fight disinformation. For example, we were not canceling any voting document of people older than 75. It was a flat-out lie. Therefore, for all of us, we have to participate in democracy. When we get our degree in the electoral justice, in my case, for example, I taught law school, and before I became a justice, I had a private life. And before we take our oath, we have to be a judge of ourselves without deciding based on the norms. People often decide on their own personal values, and this is not good. This is not the way it should be for the electoral justice. Elections for us are not a matter of the right, the left, or the center. We regulate the elections. One of our employees said that the winner of the 2022 elections should be the process, the result of the ballot boxes. It needs to be subject to audit. It needs to be transparent. So this is our goal. The first step is to fight disinformation, to work to inform better. Our communication strategy is a priority. The electoral justice, which is 90 years old, and over 25 electronic ballot boxes, does not have a performance problem, but it became the victim of an image problem. Therefore, our communications policy is dealing with this dissemination of lack of trust. Where was said, what was said. This is not politics. This is judging reality. Somebody said there was a dark room. We filmed the whole court, and we asked that person to tell us where the dark spot was. It looked very well like that dark space was in the mind of whoever made that accusation. We go after facts and circumstances specifically. We also mentioned the difficulty to end voting at 5 and to send out the information to the court that path that votes go, and it would go through the internet and could be manipulated.
What we did, we opened the source code, which will remain open until the end of July, so that any entity and a political party, inspection agency or entity try to break into the transmission of these votes. The plans, the attack plans that were carried out during this period of 6 months could not break into the system at all, not a single one. But although this is theoretically possible, we have added another step for better security. What we're going to do is that at the end of the elections, the ballot box, electronic ballot box, will print a report, and it says number of votes for candidate for president, vice president, why candidate so many votes, Senate so many votes. So it's a paper document with a QR code, and it is presented at the polling station. So what we're going to do this year is that we'll take this image of the report and we are going to send that to the world internet. So anybody with internet access, well, of course, you have to have a system to count 470,000 votes during a short period of time. But so we will have total transparency, saying here are the votes, and if by any chance the building of our Superior Tribunal is flooded by rain in Brazil, the result of the election has nothing to do, does not depend on anything in the building, because the results will be in the internet and available to all. So we have this very strong commitment with transparency. We have created, therefore, the Transparency Commission and the Watchdog for Commission, two entities. We have opened for comments. Comments were made. They were incorporated in our decisions. And as I try to conclude my initial presentation, we attach great importance to the observation mission. So we came here yesterday to sign an agreement with the OAS, the Organization of American States Electoral Commission, Electoral Observation Mission. It will be there, and it will be, the OAS will be one of the most important observers with all the technical resources, personnel, etc., to observe and to report and show any circumstances that have to do with the legitimacy of the contest. The Secretary General, Mr. Almagro, told us that there will be about 100 observers from the Organization of American States. That's very important for us. And they could spread themselves throughout Brazil. They will be, spreading all over Brazil. The Inter-American Union of Electoral Bodies will also be there. At the beginning of August, they will send a first mission. We have an agreement also with the Parliament of Mercosur, which will send an observation mission. We have meetings also with Lusophone countries throughout the world. Angola will be heading the mission, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Portugal, all those countries with us, and the World Electoral Justice Network will be there too, Carter Center, and so we also invite other observers, individuals who are experts in Europe and the Americas. So, as I say, Electoral Brazil wants to be seen. We want to be seen because this visibility, of course, makes the electoral process even more legitimate, and this really contributes to the defense of democracy in Brazil. And, we accepted a suggestion from the OAS. In 2018, there was a final report from the OAS suggested Brazil that other than international missions, we should adopt a different model, which is national observer mission, universities, research institutions, independent from political parties, of course. So these national missions could contribute to electoral observation. We had a pilot experience in 2020 for municipal elections, and it worked very well. So we have, for the next elections, we had a call for these institutions to present their willingness to do that, but it was closed yesterday. We have 7 institutions that have applied, and so we have an important body of national observation within Brazil. So this is something I wanted to say about election observance. So we, representatives of the electoral justice, we think we're ready to do what we are tasked with doing, organizing the elections of October the 2nd and to delivering to Brazilian population what the population deserves, not just the counting of the votes, but trust and confidence. Confidence in the electoral justice and confidence in democracy. So I'm ready to answer any questions. Thank you.
Eu esqueci de tirar a máscara quando eu falei do início, desculpe, tantos costumes que...
I'm sorry, I forgot to remove the mask when I first spoke. I forgot. I apologize for that. Thank you, Mr. Minister, again, for being here with us, taking part of your time to share with us your your point of view about the preparations and the Brazilian election in October. I think I can speak for all here that it was very helpful to us to hear you, to understand how complex this operation is and all what is necessary to mount it. A country which is not only huge, but which enormous differences within the country, and there are different ways to vote in Brazil. And this task is not for beginners, as we like to say here in this country. I would like to mention, so, as I am the moderator, before giving the floor to our guests here, I'll ask you the first question. You have explained to us what the purpose of the electoral justice is, especially the TSC vis-a-vis these coming elections, which is to really consolidate the legitimacy of the electoral process in Brazil, and that's the main goal. I think that we understand that very well. But we also need to admit that there are other things in the world, and not only in Brazil, something that is happening here in the U.S. too at the same time. Our Supreme Court has made a series of decisions recently, and we know that the judiciary in America and Europe and even in Brazil, the judiciary system is getting more and more involved in politics. This is not the first time that the Superior Tribunal, Electoral Tribunal in Brazil, is right in the middle of an election process. You mentioned that when you explained the history of the tribunal, but maybe this is the first time that your court is in the middle of the political debate, and I think that we're witnessing the same thing here in the United States. So, in general terms, you said a few words already about to work, to talk to use social media, but the different bodies of the judiciary in Brazil and in the world, what could the judiciary do? Because what we see happening more and more is that the judiciary is in the middle of politics. And how can we remove the judiciary from politics so that we can really see what you say we want to see in this process? Research shows, for instance, and the poll shows that public trust in the courts is going down in the United States and in Brazil too. So how do you see this challenge? I mean, what could we do from now on this year, 2022, and also beyond this year. And thank you again for being here. I thank you. Nick, your question is a little difficult, and I'll try to be brief because I have a clear view about what you said, at least as far as Brazil is concerned. At the end of the military dictatorship in 1988, the Constitution grants the judiciary and the Supreme Electoral Tribunal to be one of the guardians of the Constitution. What does that mean? That means that whatever the other branches do, the executive and the legislative branches, whatever actions they do, their actions have to be, so to speak, filtered through the Constitution, and it is the Supreme Court of Brazil, the Supreme Tribunal, if you want, that does that. So the electoral court system, or the Supreme Court in Brazil, doesn't automatically act, because you could say, well, why don't the courts intervene to lower gas prices in Brazil? No, this is a wrong perception about politicization of the judiciary, because that's not how it happens. Well, we acted when it came to COVID vaccines. Why? Because the Brazilian society, represented by legitimate representatives in all states, political parties, could question when there's a conflict at the level of the federation, and that's what happened. So the courts did not act automatically, but the questions were supposed and were asked to question actions or omissions of the executive, the legislative, in terms of vaccination. This is a place of the Supreme Court in Brazil. So when the other branches, act contrarily to the Constitution, the Constitution itself states that then the power goes to the judiciary to look into that. So in case of omission, the Constitution also grants the Supreme Court to react in case there is omission on the part of the other two branches. So this manner of checks and balances, so that you have three branches that are independent, work together. But because in Brazil's constitution, the branches are first independent and then work in harmony. That's second to independence. So there's no hierarchy among the branches. So what we see happening in many countries, there are several countries where this is happening, not to mention the land where we are now, because it would be not a very good idea. It would be indelicate if I mention. But let's say Hungary, Poland, these constitutional courts are the guardians of the Constitution, right? So those who want to act without the checks and balances of the Constitution, they want to get rid of those who apply the checks and balances of the Constitution. And how do you get rid of them? The first one is to take away the authority, the constitutional authority of the judiciary. That's why in the last few years, the Supreme Court in Brazil is being attacked every day. And the members of the Supreme Court also. When I became then the justice of the electoral tribunal, I became the target of such insults. So the first mechanism is to discredit the authority, the constitutional authority. And the second way to combat that is to change the composition of the members of the court. So if there's a vacancy, the other powers may choose new justices that represent their interests, and that's a political interest. That's a big mistake because the judiciary will become just an extension of the legislative. That's something that was tried in certain countries. Certain countries, they increased the number of the justices, which we thought about in Brazil, so that it will give more flexibility. And in other cases, they decided on mandatory retirement. What happened in Brazil? 3 justices were retired because they, defended their own dignity while in the court. So this is a terrible story, and I hope it will not happen again. But if it happens again, there are ministers who will react that way, because democracy is not negotiable. Personal dignity is not negotiable. So if you find such circumstances, then this particular network between the executive and legislative, they will transfer the problems and responsibilities to the executive from the other 2 branches. And I mentioned the price of fuel because people think that everything will be finally decided by the Supreme Court, and maybe even the price of gas at the pump. So what happens is that there is a real crisis when it comes to the space of each branch, and the judiciary branch then was pushed into this political arena. We had impeachment in Brazil, we had the car wash issue, and now we have another of these situations, which is an electoral system. So we in Brazil are in the same place that other countries internationally. I mean, a weakening of the democratic institutions, and of course, the birth of a populism that tries to eliminate the intermediary bodies that are responsible for checks and balances. And this movement in the 40s and 30s we called fascism. And now we're going to open the discussion so members, our audience, could ask questions. I think Paulo has a question. Please introduce yourselves. Tell us your name, the organization you represent. Thank you. I'm Paulo Sotero. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I was one of the persons who helped create the Brazil Institute in 2006. In 2020, I retired from the Institute. It's a great pleasure and really a joy to see you here, Mr. Minister, to see what Brazil does well, because myself and all the other members of the Institute always try to emphasize the fact that Brazil is democratic, that the democratic values, etc. I liked very much your talk, but I have to play the role of journalist because that's my original profession here. Mr. Minister, recently you said something about a statement made by your predecessor. And your predecessor is somebody who I respect very much and like very much, Minister Barroso. Minister Barroso came here at least a couple of times while I was the head of the Brazil Institute. And Minister Barroso, trying to, accommodate things and reduce the tension, he said that he saw no problems with the participation of the armed forces in counting votes. But you immediately called that foul play, immediately, as elections, electoral processes are in the realm of the civilians. So I'd like for you to share with all of us here what you think about this. I'm sure you've talked very much with Minister Barroso, your predecessor. I think you're in contact, and you agree about many things. So what are your thoughts about this? I think that one of your first statements as Minister of the Superior Tribunal, it's an honor for me to be here to benefit from all the knowledge and experience that you have here. I would like to say three things. The '88 Constitution gave the electoral justice, and only to the electoral justice, it granted the function to prepare, carry out, and organize elections. And for that purpose, and to make things more transparent, the electoral justice always asks other entities to inspect. The National Confederation, the Bar of Brazil, the federal police. By the way, the federal police have made very good suggestions in 2018 because they are the ones who suggested that we should concentrate the counting of votes in the tribunal. And because we used to do the returns in the different regions, but there were, in that case, the possibility that hackers would attack because it was too spread out. Could be denial of service or even worse. So we had this very constructive dialogue with the National Police, the armed forces. They observe elections since the democratization of Brazil. And from the logistic and operation point of view, the armed forces do a very important job, which is to help the electoral justice system to distribute the ballot boxes in the north of Brazil, northeast of Brazil, because there are places in the Amazon, the state of Acre, where it's very difficult to reach those areas, and you need structures, you need expertise in going to those very remote areas, and the Army has all that's necessary to reach those areas. They have been doing that, and they will be doing that again. So, what did Minister Barroso did, however? Given the need that we have to contribute to the peace, so to reduce the political noise that may be happening around, he created two forums: the Electoral Transparency Commission, maybe the Electoral Observatory or Watchdog, which has 62 members today. And from the 17 members of the commission, one was a representative of the armed forces. And so we meet with the commission, and in terms of cooperation, we get cooperations from research institutions, important researches in terms of IT and information technology and communication. Many of those suggestions are very useful. 75% of the suggestions we receive, we incorporate, we add to our initiatives. And one of the suggestions, I should say, was not necessary, technically necessary, but for the sake of transparency, we decided then, in view of the suggestion, to triplicate the sampling of the experiment that we do the day of the election. So the ballot boxes, since the beginning of the year, are inspected, audited, and by political parties, many entities, so that the software that is introduced to the electronic ballot box, as it's being developed, is accompanied and is inspected and verified by all these entities. So when that process ends in Brasilia, the Superior tribunal, and all the other observers or entities, we seal the system together. So any change that is not recognized through the digital signature, the software will not accept. So that guarantees the security of the system. So after that, the ballot boxes are delivered to the polling stations the day of the elections. At about 7 a.m., the electronic ballot box will print what we call zerisimo, or the zero certification, meaning that that ballot box that will start getting votes into it has nothing. There's not one single vote. It's like a negative record, if you. So we call this zeresima, and this document is verified by all of them, poll workers, representatives of the parties, etc. So the 27 electoral regions carry out the sampling. We had 200, but now it's 620. 460 electoral elections have 620 ballot boxes that will be taken back from where they are, and that is filmed and followed by the inspectors of all entities. They're taken to a place where these ballot boxes will be used what we call parallel voting. It's an integrity test. So we carried out as if we were voting by hand to make sure if the votes are counted accurately by the ballot box. So if there is one of these ballot boxes in an indigenous village very, very far away, Paulo knows this because there are such remote areas, and so the equipment has to be taken by boat, air, and everything. And we have enough resources to provide all this to all these things. Our budget was therefore is sufficient, and it was preserved by the legislative and the executive. And I said that in my inaugural speech. The budget has not been touched, and it can afford all these activities.
That's why the situation is as it is. Going back to your question, in order for that to take place, there is a relevant activity in that direction. Some wish to change this from a collaborative activity into an intervention activity. Of course, we do not accept that, and we shall not accept that. Collaboration, yes. Intervention, never. Those in charge of the electoral activities is the civil authority of the electoral judiciary power. That is it. No ifs and buts. The civil authority will not be submitted to any other authority. In Brazil, all forces are under the civil authority. This is what makes a society a democratic society. We cannot substitute the argument by force for the force of the argument. And this is what is guiding us. I believe firmly that the democratic institutions in Brazil are on the side of the electoral justice in terms of this resilience. My name is Daniela Campella. I teach at Fundação Getúlio Vargas in Rio. I have a follow-up question. We know the concrete process, the reality is all well known. Nobody has any doubts about these procedures in Brazil. We've had very correct elections since then. If I remember correctly, never before has the or the administration questioned this process. It is political rhetoric, we know, but in terms of requests for clarifications and other questions, there has been a few lack of trust signs on the part of the armed forces. This did not start at the presidency. What can it be done if a video is prepared based on this and it becomes viral in the country? What can be done? Professor, what I would say is, first, each one of the Brazilian institutions have to play their role within the limits of the Constitution. We, the electoral justice, the armed forces, and other institutions such as the federal police, which performed beautifully after the redemocratization. All of these institutions are state institutions. This does not depend on whoever is holding power. They respond to the durable interests of the state. Therefore, this definition controls, or rather than control, verifies behaviors that do not comply with essential functions of the state. And second of all, we may have an episode which may be even more serious than January 6th here. Therefore, there are 6 conditions to avoid this. First of all, the electoral justice needs to do its homework, and this is what we're going to do. We have no difficulty whatsoever administering the election, regardless of the number of voters, of poll workers. This has all been planned and is under control. That done, we will certify the elected in the state tribunals and the federal one. Therefore, the electoral justice has to fulfill its mission. The Brazilian judiciary will not say yes to anything that goes against its mission. Third of all, Brazilian society, at least most of it, expresses the wish through voting of living in a democratic society. An armed society is an oppressed society. A violent society is an oppressed society. society can only live peacefully in a peaceful environment. Therefore, the only weapon should be the vote that will express its sensation and feeling of justice. Therefore, on October 2nd, Brazilian society will look in the mirror and will make choices whether they will express the Hobbes' idea of war of all against all or a democracy. Number 4, the parliament is important. And here, the parliament reaffirmed democracy when challenges to democracy occurred. If one of the powers falters, certainly the other one can be on the other side of the street. There should be at least institutional solidarity. Therefore, the third condition is the attitude of the parliament, regardless of differences of opinion. If we don't have that, there will not be democracy such as we know it in Brazil after certain episodes before or after the elections. The fourth now is that the security institutions guarantee rather the state institutions. The ones that I mentioned are defined by Article 142 of the Constitution with the duty to maintain state institutions stable. When they are called upon to defend institutions. Therefore, institutional security and not the opposite or anything else. That includes the armed forces, the police, etc. 5, international partners. We have visited some countries for a while, didn't start now, to dialogue in the same way that we're doing here to guarantee that democracy in Brazil is in America, which will have effects not only here, but at least over all continental Europe. The international community, I should say, is also being called upon to defend another common house, to remember Pope Francis's words. The environment that we're talking about specifically is the environment of democracy. At least in the Western world, we have a duty to preserve the freedom, fundamental rights, and the Republican spaces of power in our democracies. And 5, the press, investigative press, press that asks questions, pushing for issues that are below the surface of what everybody sees. Therefore, all of this can be put together, a dialogue, explanations. What are our state tribunals doing? They're going to the military. They take an electronic ballot box to them and open them. What's RDV? It's the Digital Registry of the Vote, which is in the electronic ballot. How are votes digitized? and how are they memorized. So this is what's been doing, clarifying, showing, explaining in all 27 states, in universities at the same time. We are fighting disinformation. We have a we have 2,200 people that only deal with that within the electoral justice. We implemented a system of alerts to fight disinformation. Any false or fake news can be brought to us and we can verify immediately. In other words, we are giving quick answers to this set of issues, which means that technology is working for democracy and electoral justice. Dialogue, justice, open debate under the premise that democracy is not negotiable. From then on, dialogues can bring fruit. I know that your issue goes beyond that, but this is what I have to contribute. Good morning and thank you. I'm a former American ambassador in Brazil. You gave us a civic lesson in terms of vote counting for the U.S. That said, I think that your presence in Washington is an opportunity to mitigate some concerns in this city about the electoral process in Brazil. You will be speaking with people from the Biden administration, with the press, to present the protections for the integrity of the Brazilian elections, is, if I understood correctly. Yes, your Ambassador Mike McKinley. It's a pleasure to meet you in person. Thank you very much for being here. You left a very important legacy in Brazil. The idea is to have dialogue bridges respecting each other's sovereignty. There's no intention whatsoever to go beyond the natural dialogue spaces of sovereign states, but we understand the world community as a plurinational community that have common areas. So here we are in the biggest democracy of the Western world, and from which we can learn. The well-diagnosed reality is halfway through a solution. We will have read a very sensitive situation that this country went through, not to say barbarian. We can ask ourselves, what safeguards should we use as protection or protective gates so that this doesn't happen? What is the role of social media, of dissemination, of inciting violence? How can this, or does this, translate into free expression, or to what extent this can be self-regulated by these media, they also have a responsibility. This is what we have been learning, and we have been having an important dialogue. We have a special sector with experts not only in elections, but in this facing disinformation. They talk with digital platforms to find the way to preserve freedom of expression, dissension, controversy, and at the same time verify when this goes beyond freedom of expression and becomes the end of freedom. In other words, incitation to hatred, to violence. Therefore, we are all learning together in this area. In 2018, we had this avalanche. I was already at the Electoral Tribunal. It was the first time that this happened. In 2020, we learned more. And for this year, this set of safeguards correspond to several protocols that we've adopted in this direction. Our cybersecurity center maps daily the attacks that we receive, the sources of these attacks, what models they are adopting. This goes from negative service to more sophisticated activities, and therefore it is relevant to have this in mind. And in terms of cybersecurity, I would add that we talk about security of our database. You can imagine the volume of data that the Electoral Court has. 152 million voters, all their personal data, the personal data of the candidates, of the political parties, of all the party conventions, and we have party federations this year, which is a waiting area of the parties of the future. It's a kind of a test drive to find out whether the parties that are part of these federations, which should last 4 years, will come apart after 4 years or not. Similar in a way to the German model of party federations, and this entity and this perception of parties and federations, they are legitimate to follow the electoral process, and from the point of view of cybersecurity, contribute as well.
We keep all the data, but the issue, the true issue, is when we are thinking about cybersecurity, I'm thinking about database. That's a big concern. However, the electronic ballot box in Brazil is not connected to the internet. The electronic ballot box, it is developed as a hardware first, to which we'll introduce the software. And of course, the development of the software is followed by the Public Ministry for Electoral Affairs, political parties, etc. So what we call the insemination of the ballot boxes with the software is one single software that's spread throughout Brazil, and that is introduced to 570,000 ballot boxes at the end of August. And in September, Well, yeah, maybe the psychoanalyst Lacan would explain that I want to reach December as quickly as possible. But anyway, we carry out a test in September, which is an authenticity test at the beginning of September in the 27 regional electoral tribunals with the presence of the Commission of Electoral Transparency or the Transparency Observatory, or with the presence also of the national observers of the election. We carry out the authenticity test, which is the following. The ballot boxes at the beginning of September, the 570,000, are distributed in the different electoral zones. Of course, in São Paulo, there are many more than in the faraway states. They are therefore stored, and they will be distributed to all these electoral sections. So, but before that, 6% of all those ballot boxes will be tested. So the inspection units plus the TSA will test more than 5,000 of these boxes. And the test is carried out to see if the software is working well, as expected, securely in terms of votes. So the ballot boxes are ready, they're stored somewhere, and ready to be deployed. So our concern in our international contacts is to show that the Brazilian electronic vote ballot boxes that were developed in Brazil, but we had for that to develop these boxes, we had representatives from the armed forces, the federal police, other public bodies, and the electronic ballot box was the result of that effort to solve a serious problem that we had. I worked during the first elections for governor in Brazil. At the very end of the military dictatorship, we had direct elections for state governors, and I was a defender. I was a lawyer for some of the parties. The voting was on paper. There was canvas ballot boxes, and we spent 3 days counting the votes. And of course, the recording was also manual, done by hand. So we know that we deserve the humanity that we claim to have, but sometimes there are some issues, and sometimes the pen that is recording the counting of the votes will not obey what it was supposed to do, and therefore would benefit one candidate over another. So we had to be watching 24 hours per day, the recordation, if you will, of the number of votes. So in the years 30 of the last century, there were fraudulent elections in Brazil. A former minister of the tribunal wrote a book about this. It was a seminal work because it proved that the elections in Brazil were fraudulent, and you had the perpetuation of the colonels in Brazil, as we called them, people who perpetuated that they're being empowered through the ballot box. Fraudulent, of course. So there was an opposition to this electronic ballot box, and those people in Congress wanted to go backward and control the voting by people, and usually those would be the most humble part of the population, which in our society is the majority of the population. It's a society that's unequal and discriminatory, and that part of the population deserves citizenship, democracy, and political participation. That's why when we're meeting here with others, we explain what the technical features of our system are. And I must say that we're very happy because we have heard from members of the administration the acknowledgement of the work that we have been doing. And so therefore, we are very happy to hear those positive comments. Okay, we have time enough for one more question, if anybody. I would have several questions to ask, but so to close, Minister, thank you very much. Minister, you have explained clearly all the preparations. You have told us about everything that the government is doing to give confidence to the Brazilian people about this process. And you also spoke about other actors of society could help in this work. And I would like to go back to mention a member of the legislative that you have mentioned. Oh, I'm sorry, media. I want to talk about media. You've talked about media. You told us about your engagement with Telegram and other such platforms. I would like to know a little bit more about the importance of such platforms and these social media and the dangers that they may represent, and how do you face the challenge, which is to preserve freedom of expression and also work with these companies to avoid that phenomenon that fake news would run amok in the society. I would dare say that TSC, the Electoral Superior Tribunal, which has endeavored to increase trust in the electoral process, is an institution that is very different from other electoral entities here in the U.S., Mexico, Peru, and other countries. Brazil is unique in this. We think it's an interesting feature, actually. The Superior Electoral Tribunal that I preside is part of the judiciary, so we're not part of the administration or the executive. No, we are an independent branch of government, practically. And we have four main functions. The first one is the jurisdictional function, which we decide on conflict, which is typical of the judiciary. So somebody shows as candidate for president, but somebody will oppose that, saying that the person doesn't have all the necessary, and we'll judge that. We'll. So we have 5 days to decide whether that possible candidate can be accepted or not. So this is the court in its legal action. And also, we judge criminal issues here. In 2021, a law that was signed by the president, this law in the Electoral Code will typify as crime the following: to spread news that the person knows that they're not true and that will affect the good running of the electoral process. That is a crime. And this law, in October 5th last year, was signed by the president. So His Excellency the President contributed by helping typify as an electoral crime and changing the electoral laws so that the tribunal could therefore remove the right of someone to exert their political rights. But that is very, very seldom used because that should be the last resort. It's much better if a society doesn't need these judicial checks for this thing. But the law is there. And so we also work as regulators. The Congress passes laws and we regulate elections. For instance, distribution of monies from what we call the electoral fund to support, let's say, election of black women. We administer that to what is necessary to fight gender violence. We do that too. And the third function that we have is advisory. In Brazil, now we use an automatic transfer from one account to another for the purpose of payments, and it's called PIX in Brazil. And that can be used also to contribute to candidates. But that could be done in many different ways, and so the tribunal decided that the elector, the voter is entitled, the citizen is entitled to know who is donating money to whom. And therefore, we decided that the use of this platform in a hidden way could not be done. So, and we have this fourth function, which is to organize and manage elections. So it is the Superior Electoral Tribunal that has this fourth function too. So we are very different from other such bodies. And now, in terms of what to do with the multimedias, the media in general, social media, and the issue of freedom of expression.
There's a challenge there, a big one, and we believe that democracy has always to be tested to its limits. We defend freedom of expression, and that is our priority. And the electoral justice has been behaving under this idea. During an election, the debates and the controversies are very dense, are very strong, to the point of testing the limits of democracy. However, as far as we are concerned, strong democracies have to take strong criticism. So to criticize is a right. The limit is in terms of behaviors that disseminate crime or well-known fake news, as one congressman on election day of 2018 disseminated that he had verified that the federal police in a certain electoral section had removed a ballot box that was evidence of a fraud there, and we went after him. He lost his mandate and will not be eligible for 8 years. The electoral justice tries to balance contentious claims and problems with rights. We cannot omit ourselves as we try not to be unduly active. And we think that this is how a democratic society should behave. Thank you very much, Justice, for having dedicated this time to us. I think I speak on behalf of all who wish you luck and a good, deserved rest in December.